David Brewster here with the Scales and Tails, and this is part 2 of Modal Mastery. And I do want to point out one thing before we get started in the second, part of this. I did have a typo actually in the first lesson, and as soon as I noticed it, I got so upset. I was like, "Dang it!" But it was one of the graphics. I think it was the last notation example I showed, and this is the corrected, and with an arrow kind of showing you where the correction was made. To some of you, that might not seem like a super huge deal. There was one, note name that was wrong, and I wrote A for some reason instead of D, and it was Aeolian. So the only excuse I could even think of is like, well, I was just thinking of Aeolian A, typed it twice, whatever. Typos happen, unfortunately, and I've been writing in kind of in the publishing world now for a long time. In the publishing world, I guess it's considered a while. So, typos happen. There are some typos in some of my material that I didn't make, and the first thing I noticed was the typo. As soon as I saw it printed and published in front of me, it was like, oh no, but those things happen. That I actually caused. Now, some of the other typos and stuff I've noticed, they actually weren't caused by me, but they appear, in my work, which sucks, but whatever. So this episode is really just going to help you hear the modes a little bit clearer, and it's going to give you something to kind of think about. You can kind of associate it with different images or different players or different some people like to associate music with colors, but as far as modal flavors, for myself and a lot of my students over the years, associating each mode with a certain player that's kind of related or relevant to that mode makes sense. So we're going to do this in a rock style. We could very well do this in jazz. We could do it in several other styles of music too. Metal, I guess. Even though Ionian would be kind of hard to find in metal, I guess you can find it, but it's rare. But the other thing we're going to look at is a topic or an idea that I've had for a while and I've used with students. And if you have ever taken lessons from me in the past, you probably are aware of this lesson. It's called modal drones, and we're going to use drone strings to help you kind of hear and locate the modes. And we're going to look at the modes in a parallel view instead of the kind of series view that we looked at last time, where we step through the key of F and located all the major scale modes related to the key of F major. Instead of doing that, we're going to lock into one key and run through the modes in the same key. So you can actually see and also hear, the differences between each scale and each mode. Okay, for Ionian, just basically the major scale, we're going to use a droned low E string for this. And we're also going to play each scale in the 7th position. And we're going to start on the A string. That way we can allow the low E string to ring and become a drone. So we're going to use this fingering pattern, which we actually uncovered in the previous lesson. When we looked in the key of F. So we're going to take that major scale fingering and play it right here in the key of E. And we're also going to use that low E string, like I said, as a drone. So you can kind of hear we're using that low E string to at least give us, a partial picture of the key or the tonality. So to help you kind of associate this with a player, like when I think of the major scale, there's a lot of people I think of, but for this, I just tried to think of like a very famous important guitarist, and I thought of George Harrison. A lot of the Beatles music was in major keys. He did take solos and played fills and like riffs and stuff in major keys. So I gave Ionian to George Harrison. Up next is Dorian, and instead of moving to F sharp, which would be F sharp Dorian in the key of E, we're going to stay, like I said, in a parallel view, and we're going to stay in the key of E so we can continue using that low E string as a drone. And also just to take a different look at the modes. We're kind of flipping the modes in a different way. So now we're going to flat the 3rd. If we compare it to the major scale, we're going to flat the 3rd, and we're going to flat the 7th. And that would look and sound like this. And screwed up and forgot to hit the drone there. So here's the drone. You know, and it's helping you kind of hear, you know, where that mode kind of fits, or the tonality. You know, it kind of reveals a little bit of that sound. For Dorian, you know, as far as picking like a famous guitarist to associate with it, this one's pretty obvious. We're gonna pick, you know, Carlos Santana, who's made a career of, you know, using the Dorian mode, and you can hear it in lots of his songs. Oyo Como Va, and there's a bunch where he's kind of flirting and playing, you know, Dorian ideas. So Carlos Santana is associated with Dorian. Up next is Phrygian, and you know, obviously has a very exotic sound. And I usually think of it, you know, associated with flamenco music, you know, because it has such a, you know, distinct sound. And right there, we can just use that droned E. And it has a very, you know, telltale kind of exotic sound. And I would associate that with Yngwie Malmsteen. You know, there are some other guitarists. I mean, you could think of Richie Blackmore. You could think of, you know, several players. But I'm going to associate that with Yngwie, you know, who's, you know, Yngwie's kind of hard to forget. So, you kind of tie him in with Phrygian, which he does use Phrygian. You know, he's really well known for harmonic minor, but he does use Phrygian, Phrygian dominant, and some other scales too. Next we have Lydian, which of course we have a raised fourth, you know, tonality with Lydian. So, you know, very interesting scale, very useful scale. You could associate this with a lot of guitarists, but with the drone scale. You can see there we just basically took the major scale and raised the fourth. Really cool sound, and we're going to associate that with Steve Vai, of course. Steve Vai loves Lydian. You know, he plays it all the time. So when you think of Lydian, just think of Steve Vai, and it'll kind of give you a, you know, a mental picture of what that mode kind of sounds like. Right up next we have Mixolydian, of course, and you know, the flat 7, dominant 7 sound. You know, very distinct. And of course, Mixolydian I would associate with a whole bunch of different people. You know, you could think of funk, you could think of blues, but I would think of somebody like Slash. You know, once again, kind of like Yngwie, Slash is really hard to forget. He uses Mixolydian a lot. You think of Paradise City and some of those songs. He was shredding, you know, Mixolydian in that solo. And he normally would blend like minor pentatonic with Mixolydian, you know, for some of those runs and stuff, which is what I'm thinking of when I think of, you know, him associated with Mixolydian. So there's a lot of people you could think of. Satriani. There's a ton of people you could think of, but for some reason my mind kind of latches on to Slash, and that's just me. All right, up next is Aeolian, and you know, the natural minor scale, and we actually had a Scales and Tales, you know, series, the Minor Scale Mastery, and we were talking about Aeolian, and here we are, you know, converting, you know, that E major scale to E Aeolian, And we'll just, flat the third, flat the sixth, and flat the seventh of a major scale, and you're playing Aeolian. Very, very signature, distinct sound. Right, very, very common sound. And I would associate that with Randy Rhoads, who was very well known for using Aeolian. And we've actually talked about Randy using that scale in 3 for All episode. And definitely Randy Rhoads is kind of linked with that scale. A lot of people do mention, his name whenever they mention Aeolian. So Randy Rhoads, wins the Aeolian title. All right, last up is Locrian, and the ugly duckling, the really so nasty to most people's ears, but I definitely like this mode mainly because it really just has a sour sound, catches people's ears, in a funny way. Very unusual sound for sure. You're so used to hearing, a regular fifth. So this first time you hear that flat 5 in place of it, your ear is not used to that at all. So there are a lot of people you could associate with that. Honestly, I do think of Francombali for some reason. When I think of Locrian, I just think of Francombali almost right off the bat. But we were thinking more of rock players, and I guess you could think rock, of Francombali. He definitely, taught a ton of rock and shred guitarists how to sweep, so they're, it's kind of a rock and roll, feather in his cap. But Frank is kind of more well known as a fusion jazz guitarist, jazz rock, I guess, fusion. So I would list, even though it might be more of a metal choice, but Jeff Hanneman from Slayer, because whether Slayer realized it or not, whether Jeff, realized it or not, some of those brutal riffs from Slayer dip into Locrian, and just sour sounds and flat 5s and flat 2s and stuff, and they were hitting some of that stuff, and I don't know if they actually knew it or if they were just using their ear. It's hard to say, but that's a very very puzzling and distinct scale, so they kind of gravitated toward it. And then one more time, just running through, the modal drones. Here's Ionian. Here's Dorian. Here's Phrygian. Here's Lydian. Mixolydian. Aeolian. The old Locrian. But anyway, leave some feedback and some comments, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back with some more 3 for All and chord play and scales and tails and Brewster's Millions of Rants and a whole bunch of other stuff very soon. Thank you.